Well, welcome this evening to the webinar celebrating the 2026 Information Book Award shortlist. I'm Helen Cleaves. I'm a school librarian at Ibstock Place School, and I am in my lovely library this evening. And it's nice to not have Year 11s here. And I'm also the chair of the Information Book Award judges. This event is being recorded. So this evening, the conversation will range across the whole shortlist, discussing books from picture books to those aimed at teenagers. The panelists will share from their shortlisted titles as well as take questions. And please submit questions into the chat box as we go. I'll try my best to get to all of them. If we get a bit short for time, then we may need to take questions in another way, but we'll worry about that if we need to. So I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our panelists for this evening. We have, first of all, Isabel Thomas, who is the author of Frog. Rebecca Struthers and Alam Shahar, the creators of About Time. Anu Adebogan, the author of It's a Brave Young World. James Mitchum, the publisher at DK Books, the sponsor of this year's Information Book Award, and Josephine Shuanmi, the school librarian at Little Ilford School, who will be sharing shortly regarding their school's experience. So the Information Book Award exists to help school librarians celebrate the value of information books for children and young people. The award brings together an expert judging panel made up of school librarians, authors, and other industry experts who know what makes a brilliant information book to select winners across 3 age categories. As part of the award, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of children take part in the IBA Book Club, voting for a Children's Choice winner in each category, as well as their overall favourite. Not surprisingly, the children don't always agree with the grown-ups. It's great when we do agree, but of course, like in any book club, when we don't, I immediately want to know why. The award is proudly sponsored by DK, a global publisher with over 50 years of pioneering ways to bring knowledge and adventure to people around the world. For some children, the real world is more relatable than fiction. Information books meet them where they are. Reading for curiosity's sake gives them the chance to explore new areas of knowledge and build on existing interests. The more children know about the world, how it works and how to navigate it, the better equipped they are to meet the challenges of life. Someone who knows a lot about how to make information books relevant and engaging for children is James Mitchum, publisher at DK Books. James, we're delighted to have you with us this evening. Can you tell us a bit more about how you approach creating information books for children and why they're so important?
Of course, thank you. Thanks, Helen, and good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to be here with you all. Actually, Helen, it's interesting. You were kind of just touching on the core of what I was going to say in your intro there. So at DK, we've got a fledgling fiction imprint called DK Flip, but by a large margin, readers kind of come to us and they know us for non-fiction. And I think there is a misconception sometimes that people have, although I think there's probably, I can safely say that those of us here are not among them, that with information books or non-fiction, that they're somehow less creative than fiction books, and that they're really a collection of just facts and dates and diagrams and text and things. And I just don't believe that to be true. Just like fiction writing, non-fiction writing and design, it's such a specific skill, and there's a real craft and there's a real artistry to it. Creating a really good information book is it's a delicate balancing act between entertainment and also education. It's not just a case of asking what's the fact here, or why does X do Y, or whatever. It's really about trying to find a hook to give the reader something to take away from a book, to be curious, to be interested, and find something that's memorable to them, something that they're going to carry with them, not just to be a receptacle for facts or information as it lies. And I think with children books in particular, I think one of the most important things and why they're so valuable is about that we can meet the reader on their terms and find a way to distill really complex subjects down to their core essence. Most of the time, I don't know if people know this, but most of the time the goal here isn't to be comprehensive. Very rarely in children's publishing is the goal to cover a subject in its full entirety. It's really about sparking a curiosity, to make children want to learn more, to find something that they find interesting, or develop a love for a subject they didn't know they had yet, and just a kind of way to engage them and have them keep asking questions and being engaged with the subject.
Fantastic. And thank you. I mean, these books are certainly definitely not uncreative, that is for sure. They're stunning. And so could you talk a little bit about how you see information books and how they sit alongside other information sources that are available for children today?
Yeah, of course. So we're sometimes asked, this comes up quite a lot, that we get asked, like, in a world where someone can just Google any question and get an instant answer, why do we still need information books? It's sad that we get asked it, but we do get asked it. And here's the thing, is that I always knew the reason, but I used to occasionally, in like the very deepest depths of the back of my mind, sometimes worry about this. But I think actually quite reassuringly, over the last few years, that feeling has really gone away, and my conviction is stronger than ever. We've all seen and noticed it. And I'm not just talking about the emergence of AI. I just think for years, over the last few years, the quality of information online has actually diminished. There's still some great stuff out there, but so much of what we see now it's algorithmically driven. There's clickbait, there's rage bait, there's echo chambers, there's misinformation, there's ads everywhere. The experience of being online, I don't think is controversial to say. It actually just isn't as good as it was several years ago, and that's before we get into the emergence of AI and things. And I think what happens is when a child is searching for a topic online, they just get met with this just like hose pipe of stuff. It's often stripped of context, and there's mistakes, or there's broken links, or there's distractions, or there's ads within. There is really great stuff, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that it's hard to sometimes wade through what you need to find that. And I think with books, obviously, that people have varying preferences and different tastes, and there's a varying degree of quality out there. But I do think that there's just a level of curation and intent and intentionality to them. A good book, it doesn't just tell you what something is. It should provide some context and have nuance and quality and a voice. But I also think it requires a presence. There's no links trying to pull you down a rabbit hole or interrupt you with notifications. There's a focused connection to learning that I just think a screen doesn't replicate. And I also think that books for kids, non-fiction books in particular, have a unique ability just to support diverse language styles and engage readers of different abilities and different age ranges. Obviously, this is especially true in children's books. And we do a lot of work surrounding how we make books work for different interests and different age ranges. And I think a lot of people here will know the work that goes into that, whether that's in the language, the structure, the writing, the quality of the writing itself, the design, the way things flow, how text is put on a page, even things like the hierarchy of information. Something that we spend a huge amount of time on, I know other publishers do this as well, is work out how the text and the images work in harmony with one another. We sort of have this philosophy that a design director kind of beat into me when I started years ago, that like you should be able to like look at a spread and without even reading a word, you should sort of get the gist. But then when you go a bit deeper, when you read the introduction and the captions and the labels and the annotation, with every different layer, there's more for you. And ideally, all of that is in service of the reader. A couple of years ago, I worked on Chris Horton's debut non-fiction book, The History of Information. And that was actually one of the shortlisted titles for last year's Information Book Awards. And Chris is immensely talented. He's amazing. He's been this established voice in the picture book space for years. And he talked to me about how much of an adjustment it was to write and illustrate in this new way. And he said at the end of the project, he felt like he'd like learned a new language. And that's something that's always really stuck with me, because I think like over the years I've become fluent in this, and I see that with other people. And yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a bit, but I just think there's no contest. I just think we have the better offering, and really what we just need to do is a better job of reaching people and making sure that we're serving the readers as best we can.
Thank you. Really interesting to get that insight into the experience of crossing over, as it were, from fiction into writing the book of information. Just lastly, you touched on AI. How do you see human-created information? Because I think we can probably guess the answer. In our contemporary world, where generative AI is so prevalent.
Yeah, this is quite simple for me. I think, as we know, AI can scrape data sources, it can scrape the internet and gather data and generate text in seconds. It can be helpful with administrative tasks if you're willing to trust it, and it can recreate a perfectly coherent something. It just could never. I don't think it will ever come close to creating a book that would be eligible, like one of the books in the Information Book Awards. And here's why. It just has no point of view whatsoever. It doesn't have any curiosity. It has got no interest. It's got no original thoughts. It just outputs stuff. And it can do that very well. And as the technology improves, which it will do that. That will remain true. But Rebecca, I'm going to embarrass you for a minute, if you don't mind. This is The Hands of Time. It's Rebecca's book for adults. You should read the whole thing. But even if you were just to read the first 20 or 30 pages, what you will see is there's a lifetime of passion, of fascination, of love, and of dedication to watchmaking and horology. It just comes through in an instant. You can just tell this immediately that this subject really means something to this person in a powerful way. And having worked with Rebecca, that comes across in every interaction, in every conversation you'd have with her. And that's something that no matter how good the technology moves, AI just can't do. And I think this is something that's contagious. I think I didn't really know a huge amount about watches and watchmaking before working with Rebecca and Alum on this book. But in large part because of how passionate they are and what I learned from this, as a little gift for myself when the book was finished, is I bought myself this watch, which has a moon phase complication that tracks the phases of the moon the way that other watches might show the date. Complication is a horology term that I was not aware of before this book, but now I am. And I think that's something that matters to me, is that probably the best part of my job is that I get to work with some of the most just brilliantly talented people, professors, doctors, historians, teachers, illustrators, designers, scientists from just about every field that you can imagine. And we get to kind of work on these books that should drive curiosity, that they get to share their passions, and we get to problem solve and create these things that help people understand the world around them. And I think readers can tell the difference, and they can just feel that. I would hope to think so anyway. So that's where I come down on that.
Well, what a cool watch.
It is nice.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to get that insight into the publishing process. Now we're going to hear from Josephine Shounmi at Little Ilford School, who's going to tell us a little bit about the experience of sharing the books as part of the IBA book club with her children.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. I have about 30 students at the moment. I first started with around 15, and have got year 7s to year 9 students. So we meet at registration time in the morning on Thursdays in the library. And so we all gather together to discuss what we are reading. And even the students that are so shy, they are now opening up, discussing with other year groups, and they are really enjoying each book. And I put my words in to answer each questions that I have, so you might be able to see what's on the screen. Where I say that some shy students are now confident to discuss what they are reading within the group. So that answers any chances you've seen in reading habits. So for supporting different types of readers in the school, since I've joined the school, I have made the library welcome to all students, including SEND students, who are provided with board and picture books. Sometimes they bring them up into the library and they are able to use the resources. So, the memorable moments, or the time I might say that with all the help in the library and support for students, A student joined us recently without reading or writing skills, not even in his native language. So I started him off with some phonics or BBC bite-sized reception level, just to learn some basic words and to write the letters in alphabet. After a few months, the intervention from teachers and other members of staff, I then introduced him to simple books on e-platform and gradually to physical low-level graded books, which I read with him, and he soon started reading out loud by himself. He can now read without any fear or making any mistake or being corrected. So, and he's made new friends as well, because before he was so shy because he couldn't understand what other students were saying. So he was able to pick up from the books that he was reading. So he's got new vocabulary to help him along the way. And the impact he has had on our reading culture in the school, loan statistics have gone up a bit between March and February. We started the reading club in February. So by March and April, the people have started borrowing more books. They were really interested in information books. So even some reluctant readers and non-readers are now coming to borrow graphic books, which are both in fiction and non-fiction, and also magazines and quick read books. Students are able to interact freely with each other, and the books are very educational. The participants are able to learn new sets of vocabulary from the books, which I find very, very interesting for them. So the tips I have for anyone willing to start a new club is to join your Google Classroom if you have one in your school, or another platform called Satchel. So make sure you are added to that so you can create your own classroom or for your members. So you can ask the teachers to nominate students for you so that you can, because they know them more academically. So you can also create a form on Google Classroom and ask students to fill out the form to join the club. Then you can invite them and choose a convenient time to meet once a week or every fortnight. And then you inform the parents that their children are interested in joining a book club and tell them more about it. You send letters home to them. And afterwards, you provide some snacks, because these always help to drop the students in when they have something to look forward to, like snacks after the meeting. So if your school allows anything like that, you can give them some biscuits or cakes or donuts. You can also reward them with points. So if you have a point system in your school, you can give them some points after the meeting. So they see that you share with them, so they are happy. And at the end, you could maybe take them on a trip, or you could have a picnic in the library so that people will know that something important is happening in the library, and maybe, who knows, in the future, some other students might become members of the reading club. This is something from a student, an overview of the club, and I'll read an unquote. I have learned a lot of different subjects in the club, as there are a variety of information books with different layouts and styles. My favorite book is Why Do We Sleep? It has a variety of information regarding sleep, and it has a good design with clear layout. The experience is really good and interesting for me, as I got to read books and talk about them and learn something new. The impact on my learning was positive, as many books relate back to science. And that's from a student in year 8 called THAM. So thank you.
Josephine, it's so encouraging to hear THAM relating the experience of getting to know the books back to the curriculum, and how it seems like the sort of enjoyment, the enthusiasm, the energy, the curiosity that James was talking about as well, that kind of gets fired up and then that goes back into the classroom. I think that's a really powerful way of showing how books like this can have such a positive impact. And you talked about different ways of recruiting and encouraging children to join in. I mean, never underestimate the power of a biscuit. My goodness, I don't know any book club in a school that doesn't run on a biscuit. But I think it's also interesting to hear how teachers might be keen to hear testimony like THAM's, which shows how it can directly impact on what's happening in their classrooms as well, and have the opportunity for teachers to perhaps also support what librarians might be doing with trying to recruit and run clubs. That was really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wonder if we agreed on the winner.
Not yet.
Thank you. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Isabel, the author of Frog. Isabel, are you going to do a little reading for us first?
Hello,
Would you
good
do
evening.
a little reading for us?
I'm very happy to do a reading. I'll do
Thank
a short reading. I won't read the whole book because it's 40 pages. So it's not quite time for bedtime for everyone just yet. So we'll do the start and then I'll talk a bit about it. So the book Frog, some people might already be familiar with the first two books in this series with Daniel Nares, who's the illustrator. The first one's called Moth and the second one's called Fox. So like those two books, Frog tried to answer a really, really big question that children ask. Okay, so that's here. Look, it's a pond full of jelly-like eggs that will one day be tadpoles, that will one day grow legs, and will one day be frogs that lay eggs of their own. But if frogs come from eggs, and eggs come from frogs, where did the first frog come from? To find out, we must go back to a time before frogs, before people and plants, before earth and stars, back to the beginning when everything that is, was, and ever will be was squashed together in a superheated speck, too tiny to imagine. Suddenly, the speck began to expand, and with a big bang became a universe. Still small enough to hold in your hands, the new universe fizzed with energy, but there were no frogs yet. Okay, so that's the start of the story.
Thank you. It's gorgeous to hear your voice sharing it with us, Isabel. Thank you. And Frog is a beautifully simple but very powerful in its simplicity. Observing the life cycle of a frog is such a quintessential primary school experience, but you've made it infinitely bigger and better with this book. How did you approach shaping such a gargantuan topic, the story of the universe, to such young readers?
Yeah, so I didn't actually set out to tell necessarily the story of the universe and then find the frog story. It was the way round it is in the book. So it began with a question. And I've still got this post-it note that my son's primary teacher sent home when he was in year 1. So it's 2014. He's now a 17-year-old A-level student. And it has the question he asked in class. It says, Harry came over to me after we talked about the frog life cycle and said, if frogs lay eggs, where did the first frog come from? And I think, you know, all teachers would be familiar with those children who sort of think and then they're like, oh, actually there's something that doesn't quite add up here. I need to ask this question. So I was thinking about that a lot, and it was 10 years before I even started to try and answer that question. And I was thinking, I've got to go back in time. I've got to go back to the first amphibians. I've got to go back to the first life on Earth. And then I thought, well, we need to know where the ingredients for life came from. So I've got to go back to how Earth began. But where did the ingredients for Earth come from? So we've got the first stars and eventually back to the beginning of the universe itself. And no one knows what happened before that. So I didn't have to go any further than that. So that's the kind of rationale for starting from the Big Bang and going forward. So in doing so, getting up to where frogs are today, we answer lots and lots of different types of questions that children ask about how we all got here, basically.
Fantastic. And I love the repeated refrain of, but there were no frogs yet, which ties the huge concepts within the book back to the familiar pond right at the beginning. What elements of the book do you think are most important in capturing their curiosity and making information accessible? And what was the experience like of working with Daniel on the creation of Frog?
So I think the fact that by the time children start to ask this kind of question, they might be in reception or year 1, year 2, year 3, they'll be very familiar with picture books. So that book form itself is a huge tool because they know they're going to be told a story, and they've got this kind of expectation, even though they can't put into words, that these things will link together and it's sort of all going somewhere, and the things that happen early on might be relevant later. So the picture book itself is a huge bridge. And of course, in any picture book, the art is such an important part of that. And Daniel's art is just incredible. So a lot of the things he's drawing as we go through from the Big Bang onwards, no one actually knows what they look like. So, you know, scientists also are imagining, but Daniel is just the most creative person. And we had a conversation earlier on. He said, I've read it and I feel inspired to kind of like play with different media. So we can see in his pictures, the type of style he uses changes through the book. And I think it really reflects for a young child the sort of energy of the idea that's going on. So for example, this spread is all about the very first particles and the very first atoms. And I think if you see how he's kind of dotted paint on the page and the child gets a sense of, oh, well, what energy I would have if I was doing that, you know, and they get the sense of that extreme energy. And then here where the stars, you know, the clouds kind of grow and you see this watercolor work, and then everything kind of forms stars, and then those stars explode, and you can see his artwork kind of paint splatters across the page, bleeding colors everywhere. And again, it's that kind of sense, you have order and then you have disorder, and that's really what the story of the whole universe is about. So we go through, we find order, the planets are forming, everything's kind of nice and calm, and then volcanoes are sort of messing everything up again and providing those ingredients for the first life. So I think that art is really, you know, it's working just as hard at the text, and it's helping children kind of connect emotionally with the writing. And then there are, you know, I'm not shy of using scientific words. I don't try and, I would pack every sentence full of them, but they are used. And I think the artwork really helps to give children a sense of what those words mean and to have that kind of emotional connection.
Yeah, I mean, the artwork absolutely is. I mean, it really blew me away. It was very unexpected, I think, from the cover, and then you go into the black with the color explosion as she showed us. It just wasn't sure what was going to happen next. Well, maybe I might have had an idea of the story, but not how it was going to be told and presented. And so I'm intrigued to know, like, how do you imagine that librarians or teachers or parents will use Frog? What's your sort of vision how your book will be used to spark conversation and interest in different subject areas?
Well, I think every parent, teacher and librarian is used to children suddenly coming up with these huge questions, these kind of philosophical questions that sort of slightly stump you if you're put on the spot of how to answer them. And the great luxury we have as creators of books, I mean, I'm also now this year spent training as a science teacher, and I know what it's like to be put on the spot, but we have this luxury as creators of spending a lot of time working out how to structure an explanation and how to present it in a way that even the youngest kind of children will be able to follow. So I think what I hope that people get out of it is probably three things. The first is that their questions really matter, you know, the big questions, you know, they make kind of adults stop in their tracks. They are worth answering, and adults and children can kind of explore them together by finding the right books to kind of seek answers, and hopefully give children the idea that their curiosity is science. Just asking those questions is the beginnings of science. Secondly, that all areas of science is connected. So as we go through time in the book, we find out that yes, you can understand a lot about frogs being a biologist and pond dipping, but also being an astrophysicist and understanding space is just as important for understanding how life got here, as is paleontologists examining fossils. So books kind of bring together all the parts of the puzzle to show how they're connected. And then last of all, I really, basically in all my books, want to make it really clear that children are part of nature too. We're not just, you know, humans aren't just kind of looking out of the window at nature. We're very much part of it. And this whole last spread, which is much more traditional information text, just on the last spread. So we kind of say, the last text spread says, you know, it's not just a frog, it's the story of the universe retold. And then on this spread, we learn how the story of life on Earth is also the story of humans. And I think that's summed up by the last lines in the book, which say, you are a whisper of the past, you are a wonder of the universe.
And what a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Thank you.
It really is a stunning book. Thank you. Well, we've gone through time, and so what better than to move on to about time and delve a bit deeper into the mechanics of it. And so welcome, Rebecca and Alan. And your book's all about time. And so at the beginning, where did the idea come from? How did you have a particular reader in mind when you first started planning this book?
Oh, I think the idea really came from Alan and I were working together as trustees of the museum and timekeeping in Newark for a little while, and it was going around the museum together and having a chat. So I'm a watchmaker, I should probably say that. You might have guessed from the background. I'm in my workshop at the moment, but yeah, I've never worked in the schools education, just at university level. But we were going around the collection, and it was Alan who was saying, you know, you could teach pretty much the entire physics syllabus just using horology, watch and clockmaking as your guide. And we went around the gift shop, and there were no books that brought that together. And that was that kind of moment where we're like, well, okay, hang on a minute. There's an idea. How about we give that a go? And that was the kind of seedling, I suppose. Yeah.
One of the judges, one of the things that the judges commented on was how brilliantly you take such complex ideas about time, from timekeeping and escapements to calendars, and you create something that is so clear and engaging and absolutely fascinating. And how challenging was that to do?
I think for me, that's where the kind of collaborative element of writing with Alan really came into the fore, because I mean, time is vast, unsurprisingly, as a subject, and there's so much you can do, there's so much you can cover, and so many possibilities. So it's that constant two-way discussion between us. You know, can I put this in? Is this too much? Will this be relevant to the age group? I think, I mean, I couldn't have done this without him because of that, because of my background being within the industry. So yeah, that for me was amazing. But Alan, what do you reckon? I think you're on mute, by the way. Sorry.
It was amazing working with an expert on tap, as it were. So Rebecca was kind of always there to talk to. But I just want to go back to something Isabel said about children and their questions and having good explanations ready, as it were. So Isabel's training to be a science teacher, and I am a science teacher. And actually, I think one of the things that I think make for a good science teacher is the ability to explain things clearly. And I've been lucky. I've been teaching science for 30 years now, but I've also had the kind of career where I've written scripts for television and done other kind of non-fiction writing. So I think just that whole lifetime of experience for me, but started with being a classroom teacher really, and that's what led me to write non-fiction. But with this book in particular, not only did I have Rebecca, it was quite a pleasure to work with Dorling Kindersley and the team there, because I think they have a particular approach, and they were really good at saying this is how we want the information, and this is what works for us. And usually, you know, I've not worked on a project where the kind of editorial vision was quite so clear, and that really helped us to put the book together, I think, because as Rebecca said, the subject is huge, and there was a bit of pain at the start where we had all these chapter headings and all these ideas we could have put in, and we had to be quite brutal about saying, okay, we're not doing that, and that's where I think the kind of editorial guidance really helped.
And alongside the science, one of the things that I loved about the book was the focus on the beauty and decoration and the artistic craftsmanship surrounding timekeeping. You get intricate clock faces to really ornate mechanisms. Why was it important for you to capture that sense of wonder alongside the science and history of time?
I mean, for me, I suppose because that's the magic for me as well. I mean, a watch or a clock is just a scientific instrument at its core, and yet we make them to be these incredibly beautiful things that we end up having these, you know, the amazing stories alongside them. I started out in restoration, and it's like being on the repair shop, but for a job every day. And you hear these incredible stories that go with the objects and the relationships people form with them, and the beauty is very much part of that. And that's the magic to me that I mean, I've been doing this for well over 20 years now. I've lost track, but and that's still, I find it magical every day. So I just hope if I can kind of infuse that on people. Thank you, James, for your little plug of my book as well. So I do a lot of that in that too. Yeah, for me, if it's magical, I just hope others find it magical too. And it's where the interesting careers are as well. So we've got a global shortage of watchmakers at the moment, and many of the careers that go into like the decorative crafts, we call them, around watchmaking, you've got these incredible kind of lifelong jobs there that pay really well and take you anywhere you want to go in the world. And youngsters aren't really hearing about, like, I found watchmaking by accident. I say, when the few events I've done at schools, I always say I'm the worst person to have in there because I hated school. I had a really, really tough time at school, and figuring out how I enjoyed learning, and discovering that I actually did really enjoy learning, I just wasn't in the right environment for myself, has been such an important part of my career and journey. And yeah, kind of showing kids that you don't have to fit that conventional mold, that you can do something differently, and there is still an amazing job waiting for you. I kind of, going back to your earlier question about who you're writing this for me, it was almost like the little me, the sort of thing that I wished I'd had as a kid, to say, you know, like, you can love art and you can love science and you can struggle at school and you can still be okay at the end of it, and have a nice job ahead of you, and that's all right. So that was kind of in my head at the time.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear about. I think that passion certainly comes across in the book, but it's certainly interesting to sort of get more of a sense of that backstory as well. I mean, there are so many stunning. I spent time just poring over the different intricate, like the tiny paintings on amazing. Have you seen or heard about how your book's being used in schools or libraries that you felt really kind of helped to bring it to life?
Alan, I'm aware I've spoken a lot, yeah.
I've done a few schools events with the book, and one of the things that I'm really proud of with the book is that it's not just a science book. It really does emphasize the fact that to children that you can be interested in science and the arts and they're not kind of two separate avenues that you have to go down. So when I've been doing schools events, you know, we've looked at the science of timekeeping, but then we've also decorated clock faces and brought that kind of art and science together. And you know, one of the things that we're really proud of is that there is a whole section on careers in clockmaking, and every single watchmaker that we feature, you know, has this kind of ability to straddle the world of science and the arts, and you know, they understand the science of horology, but at the same time they're also great craftspeople or artists and so forth. So you know, the book lends itself to, you know, cross-curricular use, and that's what I've seen when I've gone into schools, and indeed I've been doing events in libraries as well. So you know, it is very much a cross-curricular book.
Yeah, I think for me, if I do a bit on social media and stuff as well, and it's just having parents send photos and videos of their kids interacting and doing stuff out of the book. Like that's one of the wonderful things I think about horology, is that you've got this big science subject, time, the universe, but the end result of it is something small that you can have. So you're kind of condensing this huge subject into a sand clock, or into making a sundial in your garden, and you can keep that and have that for yourself. And yeah, seeing kids create these things and have them on their bedroom shelf, or DK created this amazing teacher's pack to go with the book too, where you can make your own clock using just a really cheap quartz mechanism. And my friend made one with his daughter, and she was so proud, showing like the video of this, going, it's ticking. And she's got it on a wall now, so it's something that she can have and keep, and kind of that memory. That for me, yeah, that's yeah, I think everyone in industry should write a kids book at least once, because it reminds you why you do it. Yeah.
Oh, here. Well, if they're like your book, then yes, please. Thank you. And so moving on now to our third book this evening, and it's A Brave Young World, which is in the 13 to 16 category, written by Anu Adebogan. And so Anu, good evening.
Hi, Helen. Hi, everyone.
Hi. And so this book is a result of your career working with young people. And what have they taught you about the experience of what it means to be young today? And have they challenged your sort of preconceptions?
Yeah, honestly, writing It's a Brave Young World was a very, reflective and personal journey for myself as well. Having worked with young people over the past 10 years, in schools, in sort of youth justice settings. And one thing that's really stood out to me is the fact that there is no one universal experience of adolescence. But adolescence is shaped by lots of different factors, working with, young refugees in Norwich and thinking about, rebuilding the sense of belonging, but also doing work, sort of raising awareness around violence against women and girls across London. So really realizing that citizenship, or the lack thereof, growing up in social deprivation, being Black, being female, like there are really deep intersecting realities that shape adolescence and what it means to grow up in today's world. And so, meeting young people where they're at is really the heart of It's a Brave Young World, and why I wrote this book. In terms of preconceptions, I think, being an adult now, I guess, and having worked with young people over the years, there is this sort of presumption that adults sometimes have of like, I have the knowledge and I've lived a lot of life and I'm here to tell you what to do. But realizing that young people are incredibly self-aware. They're very aware of themselves, of society, of the world. They have very strong views, and they're sort of growing up in a time where young people actually have a say and have a stake in the way the world around them is being run. And so I'm realizing that it's really important as an educator, as a caregiver, as a parent, as an adult that's sort of looking after young people, to really recognize their intellectual ability and the strength of their opinions, and to ensure that you're sort of meeting them where they are, but also ensuring that you're not sort of speaking to them in a way that's patronizing as well. So really just coming to realize the depth of self-awareness that a lot of young people have has been a key point of growth for myself. And I think also that's connected to, you know, again, just sort of having this perception of young people as being, you know, completely self-absorbed on the other hand, and sort of being, you know, on TikTok, and all they're doing on TikTok is like TikTok dances and sending funny memes. But actually, young people are online, yes, of course, but they are using being online to educate themselves as to global issues. You know, they're involved in petitions, they're involved in campaigns. Young people really, really care about the state of the world. And so really having that preconception knocked way out of the park has been a learning process for myself and a lot of the parents and caregivers and teachers that I support.
Well, that's really interesting to hear about those sort of preconceptions. What kind of tools do you think readers will find in A Brave Young World to help them cope with the challenges that they meet in day-to-day life?
Yeah, I really wrote It's a Brave Young World to act as a toolkit, to be quite practical. And that's why sort of interwoven throughout the book is, you know, of course, evidence-based activities, research. I am a researcher, but also memoir and story times are really infused throughout the book. And in different chapters of the book, you know, readers are invited to be active participants in their consumption of the book. So activities around identity in chapter 1, reflective exercises, really getting young people to think about what matters to them when it comes to their personal and social identity, which parts of their identity are they keen to explore more. For example, really getting young people to focus on what their strengths are and also reframing weaknesses. And, you know, I grew up in London, and again, being a Black girl, I was very loud and opinionated and very much a leader. And, you know, I had teachers that would frame that as a negative. So I really touch on the importance of young people really sort of probing at even things that are perceived as weaknesses and really asking themselves, well, is that a weakness, or actually am I able to reframe that as a strength? And if it objectively is a weakness to them, what can they do practically to work on that and refine that? So that's just one of the practical ways that it can be used to develop a sense of identity and strengths. But also the book touches on in chapters 4 and 5 around boundaries. There's a lot of language around consent, around safety, around when the home is not safe particularly, and what young people can do to report, who they can speak to. And yeah, so lots of information around what they can do to stay safe online, normalizing social media breaks. So there's really sort of practical activities that young people can, you know, engage in as they read the chapters of the book, to ensure that they're not passive readers, but that they see the knowledge being shared as actually practical and information that they can implement in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you've covered this to an extent, but I'd like to hear you expand on it a little further, if that's okay. And what do you think helps young people to see information books as something that are enjoyable and empowering, rather than just being educational, do you think?
I think you know, stories are, you know, a huge part of the way that we learn. And growing up, I absolutely loved fiction. That was my first love. That was my sort of way of escapism, to be honest. And so when I was writing It's a Brave Young World, it was important for me to interject elements of, you know, human stories, anecdotes, narrative, because I think that personalizes, you know, topics that can be difficult to talk about, can be quite sensitive. But also, instead of just presenting them as abstract concepts, I think the use of stories normalize and also make this knowledge, again, quite practical. And so one of the ways in which I was keen to, you know, have It's a Brave Young World be received not just as educational, but also empowering, was sort of leading from a place of vulnerability. So sharing my own embarrassing, frightening, confusing adolescent experiences, and also inviting the young people in certain chapters of the book to actually you know, ask the adults in their lives questions around, you know, when did you fail? When did you, you know, set out to do something and it not quite work? And actually, what are your best failures? So really inviting them to reflect on the awkwardness and the complexity of adolescence as being kind of a rite of passage, and sort of leading from a place of vulnerability was one of the ways in which I was keen to you know, transfer that with It's a Brave Young World. So really embedding story times and memoir alongside research and activities to ensure that, you know, these topics were landing in a way that wasn't just fact-based, but very human in the way that they are discussed, in the way that they're being experienced. And I also think one thing that, you know, brings an empowering air around It's a Brave Young World is really the fact that, you know, no subject is off limits. And again, for myself growing up, there were certain, you know, experiences that I was having, certain questions I had that I couldn't ask my family. I couldn't ask, you know, the people around me due to sort of cultural expectations. And so being able to turn to a book that was actually ready and open to have difficult conversations, or a space where I could find information or read someone else's story and be able to relate or empathize, was really, really powerful. And I think that's another thing that really makes this book, beyond educational, being a tool of empowerment. It's that, you know, humanizing of experiences and being open and ready to talk about subjects that some young people simply aren't able to discuss with the parents or the caregivers around them.
Thank you. And this book certainly has a very strong, relatable voice, which I think I can see how that really helps to draw children in and make them feel comfortable with the person that speaks to them. It's definitely not patronizing. It's passed that test. But yeah, I can see how it's been carefully crafted in that way. And how would you like the book to support conversations or well-being in a school?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think number one, as a conversation starter, so thinking about PSHE classes, thinking about tutor times in schools as well. Sort of each chapter can, you know, be developed as you know, something to discuss with regards to PSHEs, for example, identity, diversity, discussing family and relationships, mental health, emotional well-being. So essentially being used as a conversation starter. And in my, you know, my interactions with educators, I found that quite a few of them don't necessarily feel equipped to have these conversations with young people. And so, you know, using It's a Brave Young World as a tool to break the ice and to sort of get to know what the young people you care for are thinking about certain things is, you know, a great way for it to be used. But I also think just sort of having it, you know, in schools and youth clubs around, that young people can open it and use it as a quiet, private resource as well. You know, a young person who may be going through some of the things in the book, and again, does not feel comfortable asking their family or their friends or even just the people around them about what it is that they're experiencing, they can sort of turn to the pages of the book and get some sort of insight, read my story or maybe the anonymized story of some of the young people I've worked with that's included in the book, and get a sense of like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. This isn't a strange experience. Or they can get a prompting as to like, okay, I'm understanding what could possibly be going on. I now have the language to have a conversation with someone in my school, or have a conversation with, you know, some of the organizations that are listed at the back of the book. So it's something that can be used by educators and, you know, professionals working with young people to have interesting conversations, but it can also be used as a private resource for young people as well. And really sort of bringing to life some of the sort of academic concepts that seem quite removed, things like intersectionality, and through examples and story times, really presenting a real case for like why this is important, to consider the intersecting identities that frame adolescence. And I imagine that teachers and professionals really keen to support young people, the diverse, you know, young people that make up schools, will be, you know, equipped to have these kind of conversations and use the language that the book offers while doing so.
Thank you, Anu. And so we've heard from all of our creators, and we do have some questions. I think we have 7 minutes left for questions. So I have a question for all the creators. So this question is, all your books are very different in their information. Aside from what the children learn, what do you hope that children feel after reading your books? So I'm going to start with Isabel. Isabel, you're on mute.
Sorry, that starts again. I was just thinking about something Josephine said earlier when she was talking about sharing information books with really, really young readers when they're just beginning to read, or even with older readers who need phonics intervention to sort of relearn to read and maybe do some accelerated catch up. And I think the lovely thing about looking at information books in that way, and I've been lots of, done loads of reading in primary schools with different children, and I always reach for non-fiction because often they can bring their own expertise to certain topics in a way they can't necessarily if they're reading a fiction story and they have to understand the text to understand the story. But if they just see some of the pictures, or they know the topic is dinosaurs, or anything that they're interested in, they can bring a lot of their own knowledge to that, and you can have a conversation where you're encouraging to read, and they feel like really empowered, like they can be the expert on it without necessarily knowing how to read all those words.
Fantastic. Alan and Rebecca, how do you want children to feel after reading your book?
I think I just want them to feel even more inquisitive. I think if they go away having more questions, I think we've done a good job. I think with information books in general, so I've got two daughters, one of whom reads mostly fiction and one of whom prefers kind of non-fiction, which I found really interesting. And I think every time she reads a non-fiction book, she just wants to learn more. And I think that's a wonderful gift that non-fiction can give children, actually. So as James said earlier, we don't try to cover everything in these books, but I think we feed a curiosity and nurture curiosity, and actually I'm quite happy with this sort of book for children to think, okay, I don't quite understand, I want to know more. And I my experience as a teacher and as a school student was, wanting to know more was the thing that should be nurtured in more children. I think that kind of desire to learn. And so if children go away from our book wanting to know more about any of the topics in it, then I think we've done our job.
You took the words right out of my mouth there. Yeah, that's saying that curiosity.
We definitely want to nurture that curiosity. Anu, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say it's really important that a young person that reads It's a Brave Young World feels seen, less alone in their experiences, less overwhelmed by the complexities of growing up. And I really hope that they feel informed and empowered to take action, whatever that might look like for them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to go through, I'm managing the questions as they come in. So, Anu, I've got another question for you. Were there any information books from your own childhood that influenced you in writing It's a Brave Young World, either positively or that drove you to want to write something different?
That's a great question. So, like I mentioned, I really loved fiction growing up. But because of, again, I'm British Nigerian. So because I grew up in a very Nigerian culture, certain things weren't said, certain questions weren't asked. There is a massive sort of culture of silence within that community. And so when I was growing up, and I grew up fast, so to speak, and there were lots of questions that I had, and I found that while I loved fiction, I also would go to the library and sort of look at those puberty books and books on friendship to really just try and understand what was going on in my mind, in my body. And of course, those sort of puberty books from back then, of course, didn't touch on many different things. They didn't touch on, the multi-dimensional aspects of identity. I rarely saw myself reflected in the books. But when it came to things like, biology and periods and this and the other, that was relevant for me. And so, number one, finding immense value in those books inspired, my wanting to write a book of an information book tailored to that subject area, but also recognizing that those books didn't touch on certain topics was exactly why I wanted to include some of these more difficult topics and more inclusive topics in It's a Brave Young World. So definitely benefited from having books that provided information that I guess my parents were not willing to talk about and answer questions that I wasn't able to ask. But I really wanted to create a book that I felt was more diverse and more inclusive, and really just reflected the breadth and the complexity of growing up in today's world.
Thank you. And I've got a question for James. I think this is our last question. And so if you can answer this very quickly, James, are there any topics that you think children are more curious about right now? And could you predict a new trend in information books? Maybe the books that we'll be seeing on the shortlist this time next year.
Well, I really wish I could predict a trend, but no, I think what's great about children's publishing is that there are these kind of perennial subjects that are always going to be interesting. They're always going to have this appeal. You're also reaching a new generation of readers every time, but it's kind of how we find new ways to kind of present that or find little twists on it. So we've got quite a lot of history coming up. This is just obviously what we're doing, but again, it's trying to find avenues within that I think are really interesting. So I've got a book about the history of the city, like the concept of cities, which I think is quite interesting because I haven't seen much of that. And yet 4 billion people live in cities, so it's kind of touches a lot of our lives. So yeah, I'm sorry if it's not going to be the most illuminating answer, but yeah, there's just always these new subjects kind of coming through.
Well, I'm very intrigued by City. That sounds fascinating. I'm looking out for that one. And thank you so much to our panelists. It's been such an illuminating discussion. I wish I could ask. I have so many questions for all of you, but sadly our time is up. So thank you, and thanks to everyone who tuned in to watch. Yeah, and I guess we'll find out in the not too distant future which books are the winners.